Section 25 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. Section 25. May 25th, 1914. Italy. Had I at my disposal not the pitiful word but a strong orchestra, I would compel all the brass trumpets to roar. I would raise their blazing mouths to the sky and would compel them to rave incessantly in a blazing, screeching voice, which would make one's hair stand on end and scatter the clouds in terror. I do not want the lying violence. Hateful to me is the gentle murmur of false strings beneath the fingers of liars and scoundrels. Breath, breath! My gullet is like a brass horn, my breath, a hurricane, driving forward into every narrow cleft. And all of me rings, kicks and grates like a heap of iron in the face of the wind. Oh, it is not always the mighty, wrathful roar of brass trumpets. Frequently, very frequently, it is the pitiful wail of burnt, rusty iron, crawling along lonely, like the winter, the whistle of bent twigs, which drives through cold and fills the heart with the rust of gloom and homelessness. Everything that fire can touch has burned up within me. Was it I who wanted to play? Was it I who yearned for the game? Then I look upon this monstrous ruin of the theater, wrecked by the flames. All the actors, too, have lost their lives therein. Ah, all the actors, too, have perished, and brazen truth peers now through the beggarly holes of its empty windows. By my throne, what was that love I prattled of when I donned this human form? To whom was it that I opened my embraces? Was it you, comrade? By my throne, if I was love but for a single moment, henceforth I am hate, and eternally thus I remain. Let us halt at this point today, dear comrade. It has been quite some time since I moved my pen upon this paper, and I must now grow accustomed anew to your dull and shallow face, smeared over with the red of your cheeks. I seem to have forgotten how to speak the language of respectable people who have just received a trouncing. Get thee hence, my friend. Today I am a brass trumpet. Tickle not my throat, little worm. Leave me. End of section 25. Section 26 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. Section 26. May 26th, Italy. It was a month ago that Thomas Magnus blew me up. Yes, it is true. He really blew me up, and it was a month ago, in the holy city of Rome, in the Palazzo Orsini, when I still belonged to that billionaire Henry Wondergood. Do you remember that genial American with his cigar and patent gold teeth? Alas, he is no longer with us. He died suddenly, and you will do well if you order a requiem mass for him. His Illinois soul is in need of your prayers. Let us return, however, to his last hours. I shall try to be exact in my recollections and give you not only the emotions, but also the words of that evening. It was evening, when the moon was shining brightly. Perhaps I shall not give you quite the words spoken, but at any rate they will be quite the words I heard and stored away in my memory. If you were ever whipped, worthy comrade, then you know how difficult it was for you to count all the blows of the whip. A change of gravity, you understand? Oh, you understand everything. And so let us receive the last breath of Henry Wondergood, blown up by the culprit Thomas Magnus and buried by Maria. I remember I awoke on the morning after that stormy evening, calm and even gay. Apparently it was the effect of the sun shining into that same broad window through which at night there streamed that unwelcome and too highly significant moonlight. You understand? Now the moon and now the sun. Oh, you understand everything. It is probably for the very same reason I acquired my touching faith in the integrity of Magnus and awaited toward evening that cloudless bliss. This expectation was all the greater because his collaborators, you remember his collaborators, have begun to greet and bow to me. What is a greeting? Ah, how much it means to the faith of man. You know my good manners and, therefore, will believe me when I say that I was cold and restrained like a gentleman who has just received a legacy. But if you had put your ear to my belly, you would have heard violins playing within. Something about love, you understand. Oh, you understand everything. And thus, with these violins did I come to Magnus in the evening when the moon was shining brightly. Magnus was alone. We were long silent, and this indicated that an interesting conversation awaited me. Finally I said, "How is the signorina's health?" But he interrupted me. "We are facing a very difficult talk, Wondergood. Does that disturb you?" "Oh no, not at all." "Do you want wine? Well, never mind. I shall drink a little, but you need not. Yes, Wondergood?" He laughed as he poured out the wine, and here I noticed with astonishment that he himself was very excited. His large, white, hangman's hands were quite noticeably trembling. I do not know exactly just when my violence ceased. I think it was at that very moment. Magnus gulped down 2 glasses of wine. He had intended to take only a little, and sitting down, continued. "No, you ought not to drink, Wondergood. I need all your senses, undimmed by anything. You didn't drink anything today, no? That's good. Your senses must be clear and sober. One must not take anesthetics in such cases as a vivisection." He shook his head seriously in affirmation. "Yes, vivisection. You have caught my idea marvelously. Yes, in case of vivisection of the soul. For instance, when a loving mother is informed of the death of her son, or a rich man that has become penniless. But the senses, what can we do with the senses? We cannot hold them in leash all our life. You understand, Wondergood? In the long run, I am not in the least so cruel a man as I occasionally seem even to myself, and the pain of others frequently arouses in me an unpleasant, responsive trembling. That is not good. A surgeon's hand must be firm. He looked at his fingers. They no longer trembled. He continued with a smile. However, wine helps some. Dear Wondergood, I swear by eternal salvation, by which you love to swear, that it is extremely unpleasant for me to cause you this little pain. Keep your senses, Wondergood. Your senses, your senses. Your hand, my friend. I gave him my hand, and Magnus enveloped my palm and fingers and held them long in his own paw, strained, permeated with some kind of electric currents. Then he let them go, sighing with relief. That's it, just so. Courage, Wondergood. I shrugged my shoulders, lit a cigar and asked, Your illustration of the very wealthy man who has suddenly become a beggar, does that concern me? Am I penniless? Magnus answered slowly as he gazed straight into my eyes. If you wish to put it that way, yes. You have nothing left, absolutely nothing, and this palace, too, is already sold. Tomorrow the new owners take possession. Oh, that is interesting. And where are my billions? I have them. They are mine. I am a very wealthy man, Wondergood. I moved my cigar to the other corner of my mouth and asked, And you are ready, of course, to give me a helping hand? You are a contemptible scoundrel, Thomas Magnus. If that's what you call me, yes. Something on that order. And a liar. Perhaps. In general, dear Wondergood, it is very necessary for you to change your outlook on life and man. You are too much of an idealist. And you? I rose from my chair. For you it is necessary to change your fellow conversationalist. Permit me to bid you goodbye and to send a police commissary in my place. Magnus laughed. Nonsense, Wondergood. Everything has been done within the law. You yourself have handed over everything to me. This will surprise no one, with your love for humanity. Of course, you can proclaim yourself insane. You understand? And then perhaps I may get to the penitentiary. But you will land in an insane asylum. You would hardly like that, dear friend. Police. Well, go on talking. It will relieve the first effects of the blow. I think it was really difficult for me to conceal my excitement. I hurled my cigar angrily into the fireplace, while my eye carefully measured both the window and Magnus. No, this carcass was too big to play ball with. At that moment, the loss of my wealth had not yet fully impressed itself upon my mind, and it was that which maddened me as much as the brazen tone of Magnus and the patronizing manner of the old scoundrel. In addition, I dimly sensed something portentous of evil and sorrow, like a threat, as if some real danger were lurking not in front of me, but behind my back. "What is this all about?" I shouted, stamping my foot. "What is this all about?" replied Magnus, like an echo. "Yes, I really cannot understand why you are so excited, Wondergood. You have so frequently offered me this money and even forced it upon me, and now, when the money is in my hands, you want to call the police. Of course," Magnus smiled, "there is a slight distinction here. In placing your money so magnanimously at my disposal, you still remained its master and the master of the situation, while now, you understand, old friend, now I can simply drive you out of this house." I looked at Magnus significantly. He replied with no less significant shrug of the shoulders and cried angrily: "Stop your nonsense! I am stronger than you are. Do not try to be more of a fool than is absolutely necessitated by the situation." "You are an unusually brazen scoundrel, Signor Magnus." Again, how these sentimental souls do seek consolation in words. Take a cigar and listen to me. I have long needed money, a great deal of money. In my past, which I need not disclose to you, I have suffered certain failures. They irritated me considerably. Fools and sentimental souls, you understand? My energy was imprisoned under lock and key, like a bird in a cage. For 3 years I sat in this cursed cage, awaiting my chance. And all that in the beautiful Campagna? Yes, in the beautiful Campagna, and I had already begun to lose hope when you appeared. I find it difficult to express myself at this point. Be as direct as you can. Have no compunctions. You seemed very strange with all this love of yours for men and your play, as you finally termed it, and my friend, for a long time I had grave doubts as to what you really were, an extraordinary fool or just a scoundrel like myself. You see, such extraordinary asses appear so seldom that even I had my doubts. You are not angry? Oh, not at all. You forced money upon me and I thought, a trap. However, you made your moves quickly and certain precautions on my part. Pardon me for interrupting. So, those books of yours, your solitary contemplation of life, that little white house and everything was all a lie? And murder, do you remember all that drivel about hands steeped in blood? Yes, I did kill, that is true, and I have pondered much upon life, while awaiting you, but the rest, of course, was falsehood, very base falsehood, but you were so credulous. And Maria? I confess that I had already uttered this name when I felt something clutching at my throat. Magnus looked at me sharply and said gloomily, "We will discuss Maria too. But how excited you are, even your nails have turned blue. Perhaps you'll have some wine? Well, never mind, have patience, I shall continue. When you began your affair with Maria, of course with my slight assistance, I finally concluded that you were... an extraordinary ass?" Magnus raised his hand in consoling gesture. Oh no, you seemed to me to be that at the beginning. I will tell you quite truthfully, as I do everything I am telling you now. You are not a fool at all, Wondergood. I have grown to know you more intimately. It doesn't matter that you have so naively surrendered your billions to me. Many wise men have been fooled before by clever scoundrels. Your misfortune is quite another thing. I had the strength to smile. My love for human beings? No, my friend, your contempt for human beings. Your contempt, and at the same time your naive faith in them arising from it. You regard human beings so far below you, you are so convinced of their fatal powerlessness that you do not fear them at all and are quite ready to pat the rattlesnake's head. Such a nice little rattlesnake. One should fear people, comrade. I know your game, but at times you were quite sincere in your prattle about man. You even pitied him. But from an elevation or from a side-track, I know not which. Oh, if you could only hate people, I would take you along with me with pleasure. But you are an egotist. A terrible egotist, Wondergood, and I am even beginning to shed my regrets for having robbed you when I think of that. Whence comes this base contempt of yours? I am still only learning to be a man. Well, go on learning. But why do you call your professor a scoundrel? For I am your professor, Wondergood. To the devil with this prattle. So you do not intend to take me along with you? No, my friend, I do not. So, only my billions? Very well, but what about your plan? To blow up the earth or something of that kind? Or did you lie on this point too? I cannot believe that you simply intended to open a money changer's bureau or become some ragged king. Magnus looked at me gloomily. There was even a gleam of sympathy in his eyes as he replied slowly. No, on that point I did not lie. But you won't do for me. You would always be hanging on to my coat-tails. Just now you shouted, liar, scoundrel, thief. It's strange, but you are yet only learning to be a man, and you have already imbibed so much pettiness. When I shall raise my hand to strike someone, your contempt will begin to whine. Don't strike. Leave him alone, have pity. Oh, if you could only hate. No, you are a terrible egotist, old man. I shouted. The devil take you with your harping on this egotism. I am not in the least more stupid than you beast, and I cannot understand what you find so saintly in hatred. Magnus frowned. First of all, don't shout or I'll throw you out. Do you hear? Yes, perhaps you are no more stupid than I am, but man's business is not your business. Do you realize that, you beast? In blowing up things, I only intend to do business, and you want to be the ruler of another plant. Let them steal and break down the machinery, and you will be concerned only about your salary and the respect due to you. And I won't stand that. All this, he swept the room with a broad gesture, is my plant, mine, do you hear? And it is I who will be robbed. I will be robbed and injured, and I hate those who rob me. What would you have done in the long run with your billions if I had not taken them from you? Built conservatories and raised heirs for the perpetuation of your kind? Private yachts and diamonds for your wife? And give me all the gold on earth and I will throw it all into the flames of my hatred. And all because I have been insulted. When you see a hunchback, you throw him a lira, so that he may continue to bear his hump, yes? And I want to destroy him, to kill him, to burn him like a crooked log. To whom do you appeal when you are fooled, or when a dog bites your finger? To your wife, the police, public opinion? But suppose the wife, with the aid of your butler, plants horns on your head, or public opinion fails to understand you and instead of pitying you, prefers to give you a thrashing. Then do you make your appeal to God? But I go to no one. I plead before no one, but neither do I forgive. You understand? I do not forgive. Only egotists forgive. I consider myself personally insulted. End of section 26. Section 27 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. Section 27. I heard him in silence. Perhaps it was because I was so close to the fireplace, gazing into the fire and listening to Magnus's words, each new word intermingled with the fresh blaze of a burning log. No sooner would the glowing red mass fall apart than the words, too, would break up into particles like hot coals. My head was not at all clear, and under the influence of these burning, flaming, flying words, I fell into a strange, dark drowsiness. But this was what my memory retained. Oh, if you could only hate! If you were not so cowardly and weak of soul, I would take you with me and would let you behold a fire which would forever dry your miserable tears and burn your sentimental dreams to ashes. Do you hear the song of the fools of the world? They are merely loading the cannons. The wise man need only apply the fire to the fuse, you understand? Could you behold calmly the sight of a blissful sheep and hungry snake lying together, separated only by a thin partition? I could not. I would drill just a little opening, the rest they would do themselves. Do you know that from the union of truth and falsehood comes an explosion? I want to unite. I shall do nothing myself. I shall only complete what they have begun. Do you hear how merrily they sing? I will make them dance too. Come with me, comrade. You sought some sort of a play. Let me give you an extraordinary spectacle. We shall bring the whole earth into action, and millions of marionettes will begin to caper obediently at our command. You know not yet how talented and obliging they are. It will be a splendid play, and will give you much pleasure and amusement. A large log fell apart and split into many sparks and hot cinders. The flame subsided, growing morose and red. A silent heat emanated from the dimmed, smoke-smeared hearth. It burned my face and suddenly there arose before me my puppet's show. The heat and fire had conjured up a mirage. I seemed to hear the crash of drums and the gay ring of cymbals, while the merry clown turned on his head at the sight of the broken skulls of the dolls. The broken heads continued to pile up. Then I saw the scrap heap with two motionless little legs protruding from the heap of rubbish. They wore rose slippers. And the drums continued beating, tum tum tum, and I said pensively, "I think it will hurt them." And behind my back rang out the contemptuous and indifferent reply, "Quite possibly." Tum tum tum. It is all the same to you, Wondergood, but I cannot. Can't you see? I cannot permit every miserable biped to call himself a man. There are too many of them already. They multiply like rabbits under the stimulus of physicians and laws. Death, deceived, cannot handle them all. It is confused and seems to have lost its dignity and moral authority. It is wasting its time in dancing halls. I hate them. It has become repulsive to me to walk upon this earth, fallen into the power of a strange, strange species. We must suspend the law, at least temporarily, and let death have its fling. However, they themselves will see to this. No, not I, but they will do it. Think not that I am particularly cruel. No, I am only logical. I am only the conclusion, the symbol of equality, the sum total, the line beneath the column of figures. You may call it ergo, magnus ergo. They say 2 and 2, and I reply 4. Exactly 4. Imagine that the world has suddenly grown cold and immovable for a moment, and you behold some such picture. Here is a free and careless head, and above it a suspended axe. Here is a mass of powder, and here is a spark about to fall upon it. But it has stopped and does not fall. Here is a heavy structure set upon a single undermined foundation, but everything has grown rigid, and the foundation holds. Here is a breast, and here a hand aiming a bullet at it. Have I prepared all this? I merely touch the lever and press it down. The axe falls upon the laughing head and crushes it. The spark falls into the powder, all is off. The building crashes to the ground. The bullet pierces the ready breast. And I have merely touched the lever. I, Magnus Ergo. Think, would I be able to kill had I at my disposal only violins and other musical instruments? I laughed. Only violins. Magnus replied with laughter. His voice was hoarse and heavy. But they have other instruments too, and I will use these instruments. See how simple and interesting all this is? And what further, Magnus Ergo? How do I know what's to follow? I see only this page and solve only this problem. I know not what the next page contains. Perhaps it contains the same thing. Perhaps it does, and perhaps this is the final page. Well, what of that? The sum total remains as is necessary. You spoke on one occasion about miracles. Yes, that is my lever. You remember what I told you about my explosive. I promise rabbits to make lions of them. You see, a rabbit cannot stand brains. Give a rabbit brains and he will hang himself. Melancholy will drive him to suicide. Brains implies logic, and what can logic promise to a rabbit? Nothing but a sorry fate on a restaurant menu. What one must promise a rabbit is either immortality for a cheap price, as does Cardinal X, or heaven on earth. You will see what energy, what daring, etc. my rabbit will develop when I paint before him on the wall heavenly powers and gardens of Eden. On the wall? Yes, on a stone wall. He will storm it with all the power of his species. And who knows? Perhaps this mass may really break through this stone wall. Magnus lapsed into thought. I drew away from the now extinguished fire and looked upon the explosive head of my repulsive friend. Something naive, like two little wrinkles, almost like those of a child, lay upon his stony brow. I burst into laughter and shouted, "Thomas Magnus, Thomas Ergo, do you believe?" Without raising his head as if he had not heard my laughter, he shifted his eyes and replied pensively, "We must try." But I continued to laugh, deep, wild, apparently human. Laughing malice began to rise within me. "Thomas Magnus, Magnus Rabbit, do you believe?" He thumped the table with his fist and roared in a wild transport. "Be quiet! I tell you we must try. How do I know? I have never yet been on Mars nor seen this earth inside out. Be silent, accursed egotist. You know nothing of our affairs. Ah, if only you could hate." "I hate already." Magnus suddenly laughed and grew strangely calm. He sat down and, scrutinizing me from all possible angles, as if he did not believe me, he burst out, "You hate whom?" "You." He looked me over as carefully again and shook his head in doubt. "Is that true, Wondergood?" "If they are rabbits, you are the most repulsive of them all, because you are a mixture of rabbit and Satan. You are a coward. The fact that you are a crook, a thief, a liar, a murderer is not important, but you are a coward. That is important. I expected something more of you. I hoped your mind would lift you above the greatest crime, but you lift crime itself into some base philanthropy. You are as much of a lackey as the others. The only difference between you and them is that you have a perverted idea of service." Magnus sighed. "No, that's not it. You understand nothing, Wondergood." "And what you lack is daring, my friend. If you are Magnus Ergo, what audacity, Magnus Ergo, then why don't you go to the limit? Then I too would follow you, perhaps." "Will you really come?" "And why should I not come? Let me be contempt and you hatred. We can go together. Do not fear lest I hang on your coat-tails. You have revealed much to me, my dear putridity, and I shall not seize your hand even though you raise it against yourself." Will you betray me? And you will kill me, is that not enough? But Magnus shook his head doubtfully and said, You will betray me. I am a living human being while you smell like a corpse. I do not want to have contempt for myself. If I do, I perish. Don't you dare to look at me. Look upon the others. I laughed. Very well, I shall not look at you. I will look at the rest. I will make it easier for you with my contempt. Magnus fell into prolonged thought. Then he looked again at me piercingly and quietly asked, And Maria? Oh, cursed wretch! Again he hurled my heart upon the floor. I looked at him wildly, like one aroused at night by fire, and 3 big waves swept my breast. With the first wave rose the silent violins. Ah, how they wailed, just as if the musician played not upon strings, but upon my veins. Then in a huge wave with foamy surf there rolled by all the images, thoughts and emotions of my recent, beloved human state. Think of it, everything was there, even the lizard that hissed at my feet that evening beneath the moonlight. I recalled even the little lizard. And with the 3rd wave, there was rolled out quietly upon the shore the holy name, Maria. And just as quietly it receded, leaving behind a delicate lace of foam, and from beyond the sea burst forth the rays of the sun, and for a moment, for one little moment, I again became a white schooner with sails lowered. Where were the stars while awaiting the word of the Lord of the universe to break forth in all their brilliance? Madonna! Magnus recalled me quietly. Where are you going? She is not there. What do you want? Pardon me, dear Magnus, but I would like to see the Signorina Maria. Only for a moment. I don't feel quite well. There is something revolving in my eyes and head. Are you smiling, dear Magnus, or does it only seem so to me? I have been gazing into the fire too long and I can hardly discern the objects before me. Did you say Maria? Yes, I would like to see her. Then we shall continue our interesting conversation. You will remind me just where we stopped, but meanwhile I would be extremely obliged to you if we were to take a little drive into the Campagna. It is so sweet there, and Signorina Maria... Sit down, you will see her presently. But I continued to weave my nonsense. What in the devil had happened to my head? I prattled on for a considerable period, and now the whole thing seems so ridiculous. Once or twice I pressed the heavy, motionless hand of Thomas Magnus. Apparently he must have looked like my father at that moment. Finally I subsided, partially regained my senses, but, in obedience to Magnus's command, remained in my chair and prepared to listen. Can you listen now? You are quite excited, old man. Remember, the senses, the senses. Yes, now I can go on. I remember everything. Continue, old friend, I am all attention. Yes, I recollected everything, but it was quite immaterial to me just what Magnus said, or what he might say. I was awaiting Maria. That is how strong my love was. Turning aside for some reason and beating time with his fingers on the table, Magnus said slowly and rather reluctantly, "Listen, Wondergood. In reality, it would be much more convenient for me to throw you out into the street, you and your idiotic Toppy. You wanted to experience all human life, and I would have viewed with pleasure any efforts on your part to earn your own bread. You are apparently no longer used to this. It would also have been very interesting to know what would become of your grandiose contempt when... But I am not angry. Strange to say, I even nurse a feeling of thankfulness for your billions. And I am rather hopeful. Yes, I still have a little hope that someday you may really grow to be a man. And while this may prove an impediment to me, I am ready to take you with me, but only after a certain test. Are you still anxious to have Maria?" "Yes." "Very well." Magnus rose with effort and moved towards the door. But he halted for a moment and turned toward me and, surprising as it was on the part of this scoundrel, he kissed my brow. "Sit down, old man, I will call her immediately. The servants are all out today." He uttered the last sentence as he knocked feebly at the door. The head of one of his aides appeared for a moment and immediately withdrew. With apparently the same effort, Magnus returned to his place and said with a sigh, "She will be here at once." We were silent. I fixed my eyes upon the tall door and it opened wide. Maria entered. With a quick step I moved to greet her and bowed low. Magnus shouted, "Don't kiss that hand!" End of section 27. Section 28 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. May 27th. I could not continue these notes yesterday. Do not laugh. This mere combination of words, "do not kiss that hand," seemed to me the most terrible utterance the human tongue was capable of. It acted upon me like a magic curse. When I recall those words now, they interrupt everything I do and befog my whole being, transporting me into a new state. If I happen to be speaking, I grow silent, as if suddenly stricken dumb. If I happen to be walking, I halt. If standing, I run. If I happen to be asleep, no matter how deep my slumber, I awake and cannot fall asleep again. Very simple, extremely simple words. Do not kiss that hand. And now listen to what happened further. And so I bowed over Maria's hand. But so strange and sudden was Magnus's cry, so great was the command in his hoarse voice, that it was impossible to disobey. It was as if he had stopped a blind man on the edge of a precipice. But I failed to grasp his meaning and raised my head in perplexity, still holding Maria's hand in mine, and looked at Magnus. He was breathing heavily as if he had actually witnessed my fall into the abyss, and in reply to my questioning look, he said in a stifled tone, "Let her hand alone. Maria, get away from him." Maria released her hand and stepped aside, at a distance from me. Still perplexed, I watched her, standing alone. I tried to grasp the situation. For a brief moment it seemed even extremely ludicrous and reminded me of a scene in a comedy in which the angry father comes unexpectedly upon the sweethearts, but my silly laughter died away immediately, and in obedient expectation I raised my eyes to Magnus. Magnus hesitated. Rising with an effort, he twice paced the length of the room and halting before me with his hands clasped behind him, said, "With all your eccentricities, you're a decent man, Wondergood. I have robbed you," that was how he put it, "but I can no longer permit you to kiss the hand of this woman. Listen, listen. I have already told you you must change your outlook upon men. I know it is very difficult and I sympathize with you, but it is essential that you do it, old friend. Listen, listen, I misled you. Maria is not my daughter. I have no children. Neither is she a Madonna. She is my mistress and she was that as recently as last night." Now I understand that Magnus was merciful in his own way and was intentionally submerging me slowly into darkness. But at that time I did not realize this, and slowly stifling my breath, gradually dying, I lost consciousness. And when with Magnus's last words the light fled from me and impenetrable night enveloped my being, I whipped out my revolver and fired at Magnus several times in succession. I do not know how many shots I fired. I remember only a series of laughing, flickering flames and the movements of my hand, pushing the weapon forward. I cannot remember at all how and when his aides rushed in and disarmed me. When I regained my senses, this was the picture I saw. The aides were gone. I was sitting deep in my chair before the dark fireplace. My hair was wet, while above my left eyebrow there was a bandage soaked in blood. My collar was gone and my shirt was torn, my left sleeve was almost entirely torn off, so that I had to keep jerking it up constantly. Maria stood on the same spot, in the same pose, as if she had not moved at all during the struggle. I was surprised to see Toppy, who sat in a corner and gazed at me strangely. At the table, with his back to me, stood Magnus. He was pouring out some wine for himself. When I heaved a particularly deep sigh, Magnus turned quickly and said in a strangely familiar tone, "Do you want some wine, Wondergood? You may have a glass now. Here, drink. You see, you failed to hit me. I do not know whether to be glad or not, but I am alive. To your health, old man." I touched my brow with my finger and mumbled, "Blood." "A mere trifle, just a little scratch. It won't matter, don't touch it." "It smells." "With powder? Yes, that'll soon pass too. Toppy is here, do you see him? He asked permission to stay here. You won't object if your secretary remains while we continue our conversation. He is extremely devoted to you." I looked at Toppy and smiled. Toppy made a grimace and sighed gently. "Mr. Wondergood, it is I, your Toppy." And he burst into tears. This old devil, still emitting the odor of fur, this old clown in black, this sexton with hanging nose, this seducer of little girls, burst into tears. But still worse was it when, blinking my eyes, I too began to weep. I, the wise, immortal Almighty. Thus we both wept, two deceived devils who happened to drop in upon this earth, and human beings, I am happy to give them their due, looked on with deep sympathy for our tears. Weeping and laughing at the same time, I asked, "It's difficult to be a man, Toppy?" And Toppy, sobbing, replied obediently, "Very difficult, Mr. Wondergood." But here I happened to look at Maria and my sentimental tears immediately dried. In general, that evening is memorable for the sudden and ludicrous transformations of my moods. You probably know them, old man. Now I wept and beat the lyre like a weeping post. Now I became permeated with a stony calm and a sense of unconquerable power, or I began to chatter nonsense like a parrot scared to death by a dog, and kept up my chatter louder, sillier and more unbearable, until a new mood bore me off into a deep and inexpressible sadness. Magnus caught my look at Maria and smiled involuntarily. I adjusted the collar of my torn shirt and said dryly, "I do not know whether to be glad or sorry that I failed to kill you, old friend. I am quite calm now, however, and would like you to tell me everything about that woman. But as you are a liar, let me question her first. Signorina Maria, you were my bride, and in a few days I hoped to call you my wife. But tell me the truth, are you really this man's mistress?" "Yes, signor." "And how long?" 5 years, signor." "And how old are you now?" 19, signor." "That means you were 14. Now you may continue, Magnus." "Oh my God!" It was Toppy who exclaimed. "Sit down, Maria. As you see, Wondergood," began Magnus in a dry and calm tone, as if he were demonstrating not himself but some sort of a chemical compound. "This mistress of mine is quite an extraordinary phenomenon. With all her unusual resemblance to the Madonna, capable of deceiving men better versed than you or I in religion, with all her really unearthly beauty, chastity and charm, she is a licentious and quite shameless creature, ready to sell herself from head to foot—" "Magnus!" "Calm yourself. You see how she listens to me? Even your old Toppy is cringing and blushing, while her gaze is clear and all her features are filled with placid harmony. Did you notice how clear Maria's gaze is? Do you hear me?" "Yes, certainly." "Would you like wine or an orange? Take it. There it is on the table. Incidentally, observe her graceful walk. She seems to be always stepping lightly, as if on flowers or clouds. What extraordinary beauty and litheness! As an old lover of hers, I may also add the following detail, which you have not learned yet. She herself, her body, has the fragrance of some flowers. Now, as to her spiritual qualities, as the psychologists put it, if I were to speak of them in ordinary language, I would say she was as stupid as a goose, quite a hopeless fool. But she is cunning and a liar, very avaricious as regards money, but she likes it only in gold. Everything she told you she learned from me, memorizing the more difficult lines, and I had quite a task in teaching her. But I feared all the time that, despite your love, you would be struck by her apparent lack of brains, and that is why I kept her from you the last few days. Toppi sobbed. Oh God, Madonna! Does this astonish you, Mr. Toppi? Magnus asked, turning his head. I dare say you are not alone. Do you remember, Wondergood, what I told you about Maria's fatal resemblance, which drove one young man to suicide? I did not lie to you altogether. The youth actually did kill himself when he realized who Maria really was. He was pure of soul. He loved as you do, and as you, he could not bear, how do you put it, the wreck of his ideal. Magnus laughed. Do you remember Giovanni, Maria? Slightly. Do you hear, Wondergood? Asked Magnus, laughing. That is exactly the tone in which she would have spoken of me a week hence if you had killed me today. Have another orange, Maria. But if I were to speak of Maria in extraordinary language, she is not at all stupid. She simply doesn't happen to have what is called a soul. I have frequently tried to look deep into her heart and thoughts, and I have always ended in vertigo, as if I had been hurled to the edge of an abyss. There was nothing there. Emptiness. You have probably observed, Wondergood, or you, Mr. Toppi, that ice is not as cold as the brow of a dead man. And no matter what emptiness familiar to you may imagine, my friends, it cannot be compared with that absolute vacuum which forms the kernel of my beautiful, light-giving star. Star of the seas. That was what you once called her, Wondergood, was it not? Magnus laughed again and gulped down a glass of wine. He drank a great deal that evening. Will you have some wine, Mr. Toppi? No? Well, suit yourself. I'll take some. So that is why, Mr. Wondergood, I did not want you to kiss the hand of that creature. Don't turn your eyes away, old friend. Imagine you are in a museum and look straight at her bravely. Did you wish to say something, Toppi? Yes, Signor Magnus. Pardon me, Mr. Wondergood, but I would like to ask your permission to leave. As a gentleman, although not much of that, I cannot remain at... Magnus narrowed his eyes derisively. At such a scene? Yes, at such a scene, when one gentleman, with the silent approval of another gentleman, insults a woman like that, exclaimed Toppi, extremely irritated, and rose. Magnus, just as ironically, turned to me. And what do you say, Wondergood? Shall we release this little, extremely little gentleman? Stay, Toppy. Toppy sat down obediently. From the moment Magnus resumed, I, for the first time, regained my breath and looked at Maria. What shall I say to you? It was Maria. And here I understand a little what happens in one's brain when one begins to go mad. May I continue? Asked Magnus. However, I have little to add. Yes, I took her when she was 14 or 15 years old. She herself does not know how old she really is, but I was not her first lover, nor the 10th. I could never learn her past exactly. She either lies cunningly or is actually devoid of memory. But even the most subtle questioning, which even the most expert criminal could not dodge, neither bribes nor gifts, nor threats. And she is extremely cowardly, could compel her to reveal herself. She does not remember, that's all, but her deep licentiousness, enough to shame the Sultan himself, her extraordinary experience and daring in Ars Amandi confirms my suspicion that she received her training in a lupanaria or at the court of some Nero. I do not know how old she is and she seems to change constantly. Why should I not say that she is 20 or 2000 years old? Maria, you can do everything and you know everything. I did not look at that woman, but in her answer there was a slight displeasure. Don't talk nonsense. What will Mr. Wondergood think of me? Magnus broke into loud laughter and struck the table with his glass. Do you hear, Wondergood? She covets your good opinion, and if I should command her to undress at once in your presence— Oh my God, sobbed Toppy and covered his face with his hands. I glanced quickly into Magnus's eyes and remained rigid in the terrible enchantment of his gaze. His face was laughing. This pale mask of his was still lined with traces of faint laughter, but the eyes were dim and inscrutable. Directed upon me, they stared off somewhere into the distance and were horrible in their expression of dark and empty madness. Only the empty orbits of a skull could gaze so threateningly and in such wrath. End of section 28. Section 29 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. Section 29. And again darkness filled my head, and when I regained my senses, Magnus had already turned and calmly sipped his wine. Without changing his position, he raised his glass to the light, smelled the wine, sipped some more of it and said as calmly as before: "And so, Wondergood, my friend, now you know about all there is to know of Maria, or the Madonna as you called her, and I ask you, will you take her or not? I give her away. Take her. If you say yes, she will be in your bedroom today and, I swear by eternal salvation, you will pass a very pleasant night. Well, what do you say?" "Yesterday you and today I?" "Yesterday I, today you," he smiled. "What kind of man are you, Wondergood, to speak of such trifles? Or aren't you used to having someone else warm your bed? Take her, she's a fine girl." "Whom are you torturing, Magnus, me or yourself?" Magnus looked at me ironically. "What a wise boy! Of course, myself. You are a very clever American, Mr. Wondergood, and I wonder why your career has been so mediocre. Go to bed, dear children. Good night. What are you looking at, Wondergood? Do you find the hour too early? If so, take her out for a walk in the garden. When you see Maria beneath the moonlight, 3,000 Magnuses will be unable to prove that this heavenly maiden is the same creature who..." I flared up. "You are a disgusting scoundrel and liar, Thomas Magnus. If she has received her training in a lupanaria, then you, my worthy signor, must have received your higher education in the penitentiary. Whence comes that aroma which permeates so thoroughly your gentlemanly jokes and witticisms? The sight of your pale face is beginning to nauseate me. After enticing a woman in the fashion of a petty, common hero..." Magnus struck the table with his fist. His bloodshot eyes were aflame. "Silence! You are an inconceivable ass, Wondergood. Don't you understand that I myself, like you, was deceived by her? Who, meeting Madonna, can escape deception? Oh, devil, what are the sufferings of your little shallow American soul in comparison with the pangs of mine? Oh, devil, witticism, jests, gentlemen and ladies, asses and tigers, gods and devils. Can't you see? This is not a woman, this is an eagle who daily plucks my liver. My suffering begins in the morning. Each morning, oblivious to what passed the day before, I see Madonna before me and believe. I think, what happened to me yesterday? Apparently I must be mistaken, or did I miss anything? It is impossible that this clear gaze, this divine walk, this pure countenance of Madonna should belong to a prostitute. It is your soul that is vile, Thomas Magnus. She is as pure as a host. And there were occasions when, on my knees, I actually begged forgiveness of this creature. Can you imagine it? On my knees? Then it was that I was really a scoundrel, Wondergood. I idealized her, endowed her with my thoughts and feelings, and was overjoyed like an idiot. I almost wept with felicity when she mumblingly repeated what I would say. Like a high priest I painted my idol and then knelt before it in intoxication. But the truth proved stronger at last. With each moment, with each hour, falsehood slipped off her body so that toward night I even beat her. I beat her and wept. I beat her cruelly as does a procurer his mistress. And then came night with its Babylonian licentiousness, the sleep of the dead and oblivion. And then morning again, and again Madonna, and again... Oh, devil! Overnight my faith again grew, as did the liver of Prometheus. And like a bird of prey she tortured me all day. I too am human, Wondergood. Shivering as if with cold, Magnus began to pace the room rapidly, gazed into the dark fireplace and approached Maria. Maria lifted her clear gaze to him as if in question, while Magnus stroked her head carefully and gently, as he would that of a parrot or a cat. What a little head! What a sweet little head! Wondergood, come caress it. I drew up my torn sleeve and asked ironically: "And it is this bird of prey that you now wish to give to me? Have you exhausted your feed? You want my liver too in addition to my billions?" But Magnus had already calmed himself. Subduing his excitement and the drunkenness which had imperceptibly come upon him, he returned to his place without haste and ordered politely: "I will answer you in a moment, Mr. Wondergood. Please withdraw to your room, Maria. I have something to say to Mr. Wondergood. And I would ask you too, my honorable Mr. Toppi, to depart. You may join my friends in the salon." "If Mr. Wondergood will so command," replied Toppi dryly, without rising. I nodded and, without looking at Magnus, my secretary obediently made his exit. Maria too left the room. To tell the truth, I again felt like clinging to his vest and weeping in the first few moments of my tete-a-tete with Magnus. After all, this thief was my friend. But I satisfied myself with merely swallowing my tears. Then followed a moment of brief desperation at the departure of Maria. And slowly, as if from the realm of a remote recollection, blind and wild anger and the need of beating and destroying began to fill my heart. Let me add, too, that I was extremely provoked by my torn sleeve that kept sliding constantly. It was necessary for me to be stern and austere, and this made me seem ridiculous. Ah, on what trifles does the result of the greatest events depend on this earth? I lighted a cigar and with studied gruffness hurled into the calm and hateful face of Magnus: "Now you, enough of comedy and charlatanism. Tell me what you want. So you want me to surrender to that bird of prey of yours?" Magnus replied calmly, although his eyes were burning with anger: "Yes, that is the trial I wanted to subject you to, Wondergood. I fear that I have succumbed slightly to the emotion of useless and vain revenge and spoke more heatedly than was necessary in Maria's presence. The thing is, Wondergood, that all that I have so picturesquely described to you, all this passion and despair and all these sufferings of Prometheus really belong to the past. I now look upon Maria without pain and even with a certain amount of pleasure as upon a beautiful and useful little beast. Useful for domestic considerations, you understand? What after all is the liver of Prometheus? It is all nonsense. In reality, I should be thankful to Maria. She gnawed out with her little teeth my silly faith and gave me that clear, firm and realistic outlook upon life which permits of no deceptions and sentimentalisms. You too ought to experience and grasp it, Wondergood, if you would follow Magnus ergo. I remained silent, lazily chewing my cigar. Magnus lowered his eyes and continued still more calmly and dryly. Desert pilgrims to accustom themselves to death used to sleep in coffins. Let Maria be your coffin, and when you feel like going to church, kissing a woman and stretching your hand to a friend, just look at Maria and her father, Thomas Magnus. Take her, Wondergood, and you will soon convince yourself of the value of my gift. I don't need her any longer, and when your humiliated soul shall become inflamed with truly inextinguishable human hatred and not with weak contempt, come to me and I shall welcome you into the ranks of my yeomanry, which will very soon... Are you hesitating? Well then, go. Catch other lies, but be careful to avoid scoundrels and Madonnas, my gentleman from Illinois. He broke into loud laughter and swallowed a glass of wine at one gulp. His swollen calm evaporated. Little flames of intoxication, now merry, now ludicrous, like the lights of a carnival, now triumphant, now dim, like funeral torches at a grave, again sprang forth in his bloodshot eyes. The scoundrel was drunk, but held himself firmly, merely swaying his branches, like an oak before a south wind. Rising and facing me, he straightened his body cynically, as if trying to reveal himself in his entirety, and well nigh spat these words at me. "Well, how long do you intend to think about it, you ass? Come quick, or I'll kick you out. Quick, I'm tired of you. What's the use of my wasting words? What are you thinking of?" My head buzzed. Madly pulling up that accursed sleeve of mine, I replied: "I am thinking that you are an evil, contemptible, stupid and repulsive beast. I am thinking in what springs of life or hell itself I could find for you the punishment you deserve. Yes, I came upon this earth to play and to laugh. Yes, I myself was ready to embrace any evil. I myself lied and pretended, but you, hairy worm, you crawled into my very heart and bit me. You took advantage of the fact that my heart was human and bit me, you hairy worm. How dared you deceive me? I will punish you." "You, me?" I am glad to say that Magnus was astonished and taken aback. His eyes widened and grew round, and his open mouth naively displayed a set of white teeth. Breathing with difficulty, he repeated, "You, me?" "Yes, I, you." "Police?" "You are not afraid of it? Very well. Let all your courts be powerless. Remain unpunished on this earth, you evil, conscienceless creature. The day will come when the sea of falsehood, which constitutes your life, will part and all your falsehood, too, will give way and disappear. Let there be no foot upon this earth to crush you, hairy worm. I too am powerless here, but the day will come when you will depart from this earth, and when you come to me and fall under the shadow of my kingdom." "Your kingdom? Hold on, Wondergood. Who are you then?" End of section 29. Section 30 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Crln. Section 30. And right at this point, there occurred the most shameful event of my entire earthly life. Tell me, is it not ridiculously funny when Satan, even in human form, bends his knee in prayer to a prostitute and is stripped naked by the very first man he meets? Yes, this is extremely ridiculous and shameful of Satan, who bears with him the breath of eternity. But what would you say of Satan when he turned into a powerless and pitiful liar and pasted upon his head with a great flourish the paper crown of a theatrical czar? I am ashamed, old man. Give me one of your blows, the kind on which you feed your friends and hired clowns. Or has this torn sleeve brought me to this senseless, pitiful wrath? Or was this the last act of my human masquerade, when man's spirit descends to the mire and sweeps the dust and dirt with its breath? Or has the ruin of Madonna, which I witnessed, dragged Satan too into the same abyss? But this was, think of it, this was what I answered Magnus. Thrusting out my chest, barely covered with my torn shirt, stealthily pulling up my sleeve so that it might not slip off entirely, and looking sternly and angrily directly into the stupid and, as they seemed to me, frightened eyes of the scoundrel Magnus, I replied triumphantly, "I am Satan." Magnus was silent for a moment, and then broke out into all the laughter that a drunken, repulsive, human belly can contain. Of course you, old man, expected that, but I did not. I swear by eternal salvation I did not. I shouted something, but the brazen laughter of this beast drowned my voice. Finally, taking advantage of a moment's interval between his thundering pearls of laughter, I exclaimed quickly and modestly, like a footnote at the bottom of a page, like a commentary of a publisher, "Don't you understand? I am Satan. I have donned the human form. I have donned the human form." He heard me with his eyes bulging, and with fresh, thunderous roars of laughter, the outbursts shaking his entire frame, he moved toward the door, flung it open and shouted, "Here, come here, here's Satan in human garb!" And he disappeared behind the door. Oh, if I could only have fallen through the floor, disappeared or flown away like a real devil, on wings, in that endless moment during which he was gathering the public for an extraordinary spectacle. And now they came, all of them, damn them, Maria and all the 6 aides and my miserable Toppy and Magnus himself, and completing the procession, His Eminence Cardinal X. The cursed, shaven monkey walked with great dignity and even bowed to me, after which he sat down, just as dignified, in an armchair and carefully covered his knees with his robes. All were wondering, not knowing yet what it was all about, and glanced now at me and now at Magnus, who tried hard to look serious. "What's the trouble, Signor Magnus?" asked the Cardinal in a benevolent tone. "Permit me to report the following, Your Eminence. Mr. Henry Wondergood has just informed me that he is Satan. Yes, Satan, and that he has merely donned the human form, and thus our assumption that he is an American from Illinois false. Mr. Wondergood is Satan and apparently has but recently deigned to arrive from hell. What shall we do about it, Your Eminence?" Silence might have saved me, but how could I restrain this maddened Wondergood, whose heart was aflame with insult? Like a lackey who has appropriated his celebrated master's name and who faintly senses something of his grandeur, power and connections, Wondergood stepped forward and said with an ironic bow: "Yes, I am Satan, but I must add to the speech of Signor Magnus that not only do I wear the human form, but also that I have been robbed. Are those two scoundrels who have robbed me known to you, Your Eminence? And are you perhaps one of them, Your Eminence?" Magnus alone continued to smile. The rest, it seemed to me, grew serious and awaited the Cardinal's reply. It followed. The shaven monkey, it developed, was not a bad actor. Pretending to be startled, the Cardinal raised his right hand and said with an expression of extreme goodness, contrasting sharply with his words and gesture: "Vade, Petro Satanas." I am not going to describe to you how they laughed. You can imagine it. Even Maria's teeth parted slightly. Almost losing consciousness from anger and impotence, I turned to Toppi for sympathy and aid. But Toppi, covering his face with his hands, was cringing in the corner, silent. Amid general laughter and ringing far above it came the heavy voice of Magnus, laden with infinite ridicule. "Look at that plucked rooster, that is Satan." And again there came an outburst of laughter. His Eminence continuously shook, as though flapping his wings, and choked and whined. The monkey's gullet could hardly pass the cascades of laughter. I tore off that accursed sleeve madly, and waving it like a flag, I ventured into a sea of falsehood with full sails set. I knew that somewhere ahead there were rocks against which I might be shattered, but the tempest of impotence and anger bore me on like a chip of wood. I am ashamed to repeat my speech here. Every word of it was trembling and wailing with impotency. Like a village vicar frightening his ignorant parishioners, I threatened them with hell and with all the Dantean tortures of literary fame. Oh, I did know something that I might really have frightened them with, but how could I express the extraordinary which is inexpressible in their language? And so I prattled on of eternal fire, of eternal torture, of unquenchable thirst, of the gnashing of teeth, of the fruitlessness of tears and pleading. And what else? Ah, even of red-hot forks I prattled, maddened more and more by the indifference and shamelessness of those shallow faces, these small eyes, these mediocre souls, regarding themselves above punishment. But they remained unmoved and smug, as if in a fortress, beyond the walls of their mediocrity and fatal blindness. And all my words were shattered against their impenetrable skulls. And think of it, the only one who was really frightened was my Toppy. And yet he alone could know that all my words were lies. It was so unbearably ridiculous when I met his pleading, frightened eyes that I abruptly ended my speech suddenly at its very climax. Silently, I waved my torn sleeve, which served me as a standard once or twice, and hurled it into the corner. For a moment it seemed to me that the shaven monkey too was frightened. The blue of his cheeks seemed to stand out sharply upon the pale, square face, and the little coals of his eyes were glowing suspiciously beneath his black, bushy eyebrows. But he slowly raised his hand, and the same sacrilegiously jesting voice broke the general silence. Vade Petros Satanas. Or did the cardinal try to hide behind this jest his actual fright? I do not know. I know nothing. If I could not destroy them, like Sodom and Gomorrah, is it worth while speaking of cold shivers and goose flesh? A mere glass of wine can conquer them. And Magnus, like the skilled healer of souls that he was, said calmly, "Will you have a glass of wine, Your Eminence?" "With pleasure," replied the cardinal. "But none for Satan," added Magnus jestingly, pouring out the wine. But he could speak and do anything he pleased now. Wondergood was squeezed dry and hung like a rag upon the arm of the chair. After the wine had been drunk, Magnus lit a cigarette. He smokes cigarettes. Cast his eye over the audience, like a lecturer before a lecture, motioned pleasantly to Toppy, now grown quite pale, and said the following, although he was obviously drunk and his eyes were bloodshot. His voice was firm and his speech flowed with measured calm. "I must say, Wondergood, that I listened to you very attentively, and your passionate tirade created upon me, I may say, a great artistic impression. At certain points you reminded me of the best passages of Brother Geronimo Savonarola. Don't you also find the same striking resemblance, Your Eminence? But alas, you are slightly behind the times. Those threats of hell and eternal torture with which you might have driven the beautiful and merry Florence to panic ring extremely unconvincing in the atmosphere of contemporary Rome. The sinners have long since departed from the earth, Mr. Wondergood. Have not you noticed that? And as for criminals and, as you have expressed it, scoundrels, a plain commissary of police is much more alarming to them than Beelzebub himself with his whole staff of devils. I must also confess that your reference to the court of history and posterity was rather strange when contrasted with the picture you painted of the tortures of hell and your reference to eternity. But here, too, you failed to rise to the height of contemporary thought. Every fool nowadays knows that history records with equal impartiality both the names of saints and of rogues. The whole point, Mr. Wondergood, which you, as an American, should be particularly familiar with, is the scope with which history treats its respective subjects and heroes. The lashings history administers to its great criminals differ but little from her laurels. When viewed at a distance, and this little distinction eventually becomes quite invisible, I assure you, Wondergood. In fact, it disappears entirely, and in so far as the biped strives to find a place in history, and we are all animated by this desire, Mr. Wondergood, it need not be particular through which door it enters. I beg the indulgence of His Eminence, but no prostitute received a new guest with greater welcome than does history a new hero. I fear, Wondergood, that your reference to hell as well as those to history have fallen flat. I fear your hope in the police will prove equally ill-founded. I have failed to tell you that His Eminence has received a certain share of those billions which you have transferred to me in such a perfectly legal manner, while his connections... You understand? Poor Toppy. All he could do was to keep on blinking. The aides broke into loud laughter, but the Cardinal mumbled angrily, casting upon me the burning little coals of his eyes. He is indeed a brazen fellow. He said he is Satan. Throw him out, Signor Magnus. This is sacrilege. Is that so? Smiled Magnus politely. I did not know that Satan too belonged to the heavenly chair. Satan is a fallen angel, said the Cardinal in an instructive tone. And as such he is in your service? I understand. Magnus bowed his head politely in acceptance of this truth and turned smilingly to me. Do you hear, Wondergood? His Eminence is irritated by your audacity. I was silent. Magnus winked at me slyly and continued with an air of artificial importance. I believe, Your Eminence, that there must be some sort of misunderstanding here. I know the modesty and well-informed mind of Mr. Wondergood, and I suppose that he utilized the name of Satan merely as an artistic gesture. Does Satan ever threaten people with the police? But my unfortunate friend did. And in general, has anybody ever seen such a Satan? He stretched his hand out to me in an effective gesture, and the reply to this was another outburst of laughter. The Cardinal, too, laughed, and Toppy alone shook his wise head as if to say, "Idiots." I think Magnus must have noticed that, or else he fell into intoxication. Or was it because that spirit of murder, with which his soul was aflame, could not remain passive and was tearing at the leash? He threateningly shook his heavy, explosive head and shouted, "Enough of this laughter. It is silly. Why are you so sure of yourselves? It is stupid, I tell you. I believe in nothing, and that is why I admit everything. Press my hand, Wondergood. They are all fools, and I am quite ready to admit that you are Satan. Only, you have fallen into a bad mess, friend Satan, because it will not save you. I will soon throw you out anyhow. Do you hear, devil? He shook his finger at me threateningly and then lapsed into thought, dropping his head low and heavily, with his red eyes ablaze, like those of a bull, ready to hurl himself upon his enemy. The aides and the insulted cardinal were silent with confusion. Magnus again shook his finger at me significantly and said, "If you are Satan, then you've come here too late. Do you understand? What did you come here for anyway? To play, you say? To tempt? To laugh at us human beings? To invent some sort of a new, evil game? To make us dance to your tune? Well, you're too late. You should have come earlier, for the earth is grown now, and no longer needs your talents. I speak not of myself, who deceived you so easily and took away your money. I, Thomas Ergo. I speak not of Maria, but I look at these modest little friends of mine. Where in your hell will you find such charming, fearless devils, ready for any task? And yet they are so small, they will not even find a place in history." It was after this that Thomas Magnus blew me up. In the holy city of Rome, in the Palazzo Orsini, when I still belonged to the American billionaire Henry Wondergood. Do you remember that genial American with his cigar and patent gold teeth? Alas, he is no longer with us. He died suddenly, and you will do well if you order a requiem mass for him. His Illinois soul is in need of your prayers. Let us receive the last breath of Henry Wondergood, blown up by the culprit Thomas Magnus, and buried by Maria in the evening, when the moon was shining brightly. The end. End of section 30. End of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. Recorded by Crln in Groningen in the Netherlands in winter 2013 and 14. Thank you for listening.